Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Horror Corner. Well, what you're about to see, it may shock you. It may even horrify you. But if you do not wish to subject yourself to such nerves, well, we've warned you. Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Horror Corner. I'm your host, Sean Patrick Urshan, and this week we are doing another movie review. This is Frankenstein, the classic from 1931, directed by James Whale, starring Boris Karloff, Colin Clive, and Edward Van Sloan. So, this is the original Universal Monsters classic, based on the novel by Mary Shelley, yes, and directed by James Whale. Now this is not the first ever iteration of Frankenstein. There were some before this, going back as far as the 20s, I believe. But this is the first, big production of Frankenstein's story, certainly. The ones before that were very low budget, But here you had a big studio, with this big production of Frankenstein. And it shows they had a great budget, had a great cast, and Colin Clive plays Henry Frankenstein, kind of the mad scientist, the typical mad scientist of horror, And he does a great job. He really is over the top at times, but really emotional, highly emotional, and you can't help but laugh, and it definitely puts a smile on his face when he kind of hams it up a little bit. So what happens is, in the film, we first meet young Henry Frankenstein at a graveyard. Great way to start a horror film, right? But I have to say, the set design of the graveyard is just a little bit hokey. There's this statue of a skeleton with a sword in his hand. I'm like, it looks like a decoration from Spirit Halloween. I'm like, why is there a skeleton statue there? Isn't that a little bit inappropriate for a graveyard? But at any rate, we first meet them, and his servant, Fritz, played by Dwight Frye, who's in a lot of these Universal horror films. You see him, of course, in Dracula as Renfield's probably his biggest role. But he's like the hunchback sidekick, helping Dr. Frankenstein with his experiments. And it's so funny when you first see them up close. He has this kind of devilish, fiendish look about him. And Dr. Frankenstein, get down, you fool! So, obviously, his plan is to dig up the graves of dead bodies, for his experiments, and he wants the freshest possible specimens. And so, what better than someone who just died, and these people there at the funeral, And of course, as soon as the people leave, and the grave digger is done burying him, here comes Dr. Frankenstein to dig him up. And we also see him, as soon as he reels out the other dead body, we see there's another body hanging up on the pole, So they take that body down, but they find that the neck is broken, so the brain is useless. So he says that to Fritz, the brain is useless, we must find another brain. And so he sends his assistant Fritz to go to the local medical school, where Dr. Frankenstein was kind of kicked out of, and they're there to steal a brain, and it just so happens that the professor is teaching a class, and he's showing the class the differences between a normal brain, the brain of a genius, the brain of a scientist, and the brain of a murderer, a criminal. The evil brain, the abnormal brain versus the normal brain. And, perfect, right? And as soon as they leave the room, here comes Fritz, and he grabs the normal brain first, and, something distracts him, and he drops it, and it's hard not to think about Young Frankenstein, the Mel Brooks film, when you're watching that scene. It's like, Abby normal? Oh, because as soon as he drops that, then he picks up the abnormal brain, and that's not going to produce good results. And you can see where this is going, right? So Fritz shows up, and, Dr. Frankenstein conducts his experiments as if nothing's wrong, everything's working according to schedule. He has the monster all stitched together, his creation. And earlier on in the film, when Dr. Waldman meets with Dr. Frankenstein's fiancée, Elizabeth, and, he's trying to tell him, what happened with Dr. Frankenstein and why he got kicked out from the school, because the specimens that they were giving him were not good enough. He wants something bigger, something better. And the other guy, Victor, is like, oh, animals, I can see why that would be an issue. He's like, no, I'm talking about human specimens. And he's like, his interest is only in human life. First to destroy it, then to recreate it. Yeah, and there you have his mad dream. I love Edward Van Sloan as Dr. Waldman. He also played Professor Van Helsing in Dracula with Bela Lugosi, of course, and also the sequel, Dracula's Daughter. Yeah, he's equally as great in this role as the professor, trying to reason with Henry Frankenstein, because he knows him so well. He knows he was a bright young student, but he went crazy along the way. He's so obsessed with his experiment, so obsessed with his work, that it's driven him to madness, And, yeah, so Dr. Frankenstein, he gets his, he gets the monster together in his laboratory, and it's that classic laboratory setup that you see in the old horror films. It's great with the, with the Bunsen burners and the test tubes and the pulses of electricity on these huge machines. They didn't have computers back in the day, obviously. They just had these big, huge machines that they set up, and it looks like all this high voltage stuff. And the plan is to, juice him up with electricity. That's why he's got the bolts on his neck, So that their plan is just to charge up this this monster with the force of lightning from the lightning storm that's going on outside, and that will bring him to life, his creation, And it's his creation because it's made up of different body parts that he amassed along the way, from dead bodies that he's piled up, yeah, and digging the graves, So they have this harness thing that harnesses up the table that the monster is on and raises him up all the way through the top of the roof, and they open up the roof, and you hear the lightning outside. It's so classic. It's awesome. I love this gothic type of stuff, And Universal Monsters, I mean, nobody does it like the Universal Monster films, you know. You don't get anything like that today, you know. This type of gothic horror, you know. I just love it. He's got this big, huge castle, you know, up on the hill, you know. It's classic horror stuff, you know. It's brilliant. I love it. And then when the monster comes back down, you know, you see his hands start to move, and then he gives his classic speech, "It's alive! It's alive! Now I know what it's like to be a god!" It's classic. Oh man, I love it. And in the meanwhile, he's supposed to be getting married, you know. He's got a wedding planned, and, you know, we see young Elizabeth, very beautiful woman that he's supposed to be marrying. And his father, you know, they're all arguing, and like, what's he doing up there? He's supposed to be down here. We're supposed to have a wedding. And Frankenstein's father is so funny. He's like this clueless, senile old man. It's kind of hilarious. Oh, man. And meanwhile, up in the castle, you know, Dr. Frankenstein is kind of arguing with the doctor, Dr. Wallman, Edward Van Sloan. You know, he's trying to reason. "You've created a monster," you know. And he's like, "What are you talking about, a monster? His brain just needs time to develop." And he's like, "You should know. The brain was stolen from your university." And the doctor's like, "The brain that was stolen from my laboratory was a criminal brain." And he's like, "Oh, snap." The guy's, oh, it's starting to get through. It's starting to come through to him a little bit. You know, that he might have gone a little too far. He might have bitten off a little more than he can chew. And we start seeing the effects of the monster once we first meet him. And Boris Karloff, you know, no one has ever played the role as good as Boris Karloff. He's absolutely brilliant in this movie. I love his portrayal so much. And, you know, they open the door and it's so dramatic. Like, he comes out of the shadow and we see him turn around. And he kind of slowly turns around and comes out of the darkness. And you see the makeup, and he's just like this, you know. Awesome. Awesome stuff. Brilliant makeup job, too. That holds up today, I think, you know. Fantastic makeup job. And he's, like, dressed in the suit, probably one of Henry's old suits or something, you know. And it's just that classic look, and that classic look has been used so much throughout the years, you know. It's so iconic, that look of Boris Karloff as the monster. It's absolutely iconic and unforgettable. And what I love so much about Boris Karloff's portrayal of the monster is he portrays it like, you know, he's a newborn baby, because he really is. This is a new creation. This isn't someone with old memories of the past or anything from other bodies. This is a new body that Frankenstein created, and that's the whole point of this movie, basically. And Boris Karloff just sells it so much. You can see he's slowly learning as the movie goes along about what life is kind of like, you know, albeit from a criminal brain, a criminal mind. And yes, it's kind of archaic, but he does begin to learn some things along the way throughout the movie, and I really enjoy that because Boris Karloff sells it 100%, you know. First thing he learns is fire bad, okay? Because Fritz, his assistant, you know, is constantly swinging the fire torch around him, and he's like, oh, you know, like, I love it. Oh man, the guy's totally tormenting him, and I can see why Fritz meets his end, you know, like, do not play with the monster, okay? Do you see this guy? And he's constantly, like, egging him on and swinging the torch at him. whipping them with the whip, you know, like, and then later on he's like, ah, you hear, like, they find him dead, you know, and the monster attacks Frankenstein and the doctor, you know, so they have to take him out with a sedative, you know, with the hypodermic needle. They have to take him out, you know. He's just about to choke Frankenstein to death, you know, and he feels the effects of the sedative that they gave him, you know, and he falls down. So the plan is that, you know, hey Henry, you're gonna go get married now and live happily ever after, and the doctor is going to take care of everything. The professor is going to take care of everything. He's going to preserve your findings and your experiments, and, you know, what you've managed to discover, all your discoveries. And he will slowly take care of the monster painlessly. So that's what we see the doctor doing, you know. He's got the monster on the table, ready to, like, I don't know, give him a lethal injection or something, but the monster lifts his hand up right behind him, is like, you know. So the monster kills Dr. Waldman, and he's out on the loose. He's out in the streets. He escapes the castle, and now he's out there. He's out into society. He's out on the streets, you know. And that's a horrifying thought, you know. That's this uncontrollable monster, unpredictable monster is out there, you know. Who knows what chaos he can create, you know. And so we see Henry Frankenstein has just gotten married. Everything's great, you know. Everyone's happy, you know. The father is happy. He's raising the drink and glass and making toast. And meanwhile, the monster's out there, like, terrorizing people. Although there's this one scene where he sees this little girl, you know, playing in the fields. And the monster comes out, and he's like, he's kind of taken aback, you know, because, like I said, he's trying to learn as he goes along, and he sees that this young innocent child is greeting him in friendship, you know. He's treating the little girl is treating him with respect and kindness and happiness, and he kind of is like taken by that, you know. He's like, wow, this girl's actually nice to me. He's not swinging a pitchfork at me or a torch with fire, and, you know, she's actually being nice to me and kind and gentle, and he responds to that, and that's a really beautiful scene, you know. The monster with the young girl by the water, and, you know, she's showing the flowers, and, you know, look, the flowers float in the river when you flick them out there, and he's like, wow, you know, I'm gonna try that too, and he sees that. And then he's like, oh, well, maybe the little girl will float if you drop her in the lake. So he picks her up and throws her in the lake, and she drowns, you know, and he's just freaking out, and he just runs off, you know, because he doesn't know how to handle it, you know. Guy was just born yesterday, you know. So he doesn't know what to do, so he freaks out and runs away, and, you know. Yeah, the monster's back on the loose, and he's crazed, you know, and he starts terrorizing the wedding, you know, and he sneaks in the room of the bride, the newlywed, and freaks her out, scares the living crap out of her, sneaks up behind her, she's like, ah, you know. So yeah, the monster freaks out and runs off into the hills, into the mountains, and you know. And, of course, the father of the young girl finds her body, and it's a really dramatic scene, you know. The wedding's going on, there's a big party, and he kind of shows up with the girl's dead body and brings it to the burgomaster of town, you know. And they start a big, you know, lynch mob, you know, with the pitchforks and the torches, and they decide to track down the monster to kill him, you know, and it all comes to this fiery conclusion and the epic finale at the old windmill where Frankenstein tracks him down, you know. It's a great classic scene, and this is a great classic movie. It's an absolute masterpiece. I think it holds up so well to this day. Yes, it might have a little bit of campiness, but that only adds to the charm, you know. There is a bit of times where it has kind of a little budget, like the opening grave scene, but in closing, I give James Whale's Frankenstein from 1931 2 devil horns way up. Run and buy this movie in any form you can, DVD, Blu-ray, 4K, or watch it on TV on Halloween. Whatever you have to do, this movie is amazing, and it's an absolute classic. And it's absolutely immortal in the horror genre. And thank you for joining me, Sean Patrick Urshan, in the Horror Corner. Tune in and stay scared.